There is a version of the empath that Machiavelli never wrote about directly. He wrote about princes and courtiers, about power and strategy, about the mechanics of influence in a world that rewards the ruthless and punishes the naive. He wrote about human nature with a precision that most people still find uncomfortable 500 years later. But what he never described, what perhaps he never encountered in a form he recognized, was the empath who had completed their transformation. The empath who had passed through everything the world threw at them and arrived somewhere on the other side that could not be manipulated, could not be drained, could not be moved by guilt or charm or the performance of need. Because if Machiavelli had met that person, he would have recognized them immediately as the most quietly dangerous human being in any room. Sophia is the ancient Greek word for wisdom, but not the wisdom of books or arguments or accumulated information. Sophia is the wisdom that is forged inside suffering and refined inside silence. It is what remains when everything that was false has been burned away. It is what the empath becomes after years of giving everything they had to people in situations that were never going to give it back after learning, through the most painful possible curriculum, that their gift of feeling deeply was being mistaken for an invitation to be consumed. Sophia is what happens when that lesson is finally, completely, irreversibly learned. And when an empath reaches it, 7 specific things begin to happen that most people around them will never be able to explain. Machiavelli wrote that the highest form of power is the kind that does not need to announce itself. The prince who must declare his strength has already revealed his weakness. The general who must threaten has already admitted that his authority is not self-evident. True power, the kind that reshapes rooms without a word being spoken, that shifts the behavior of others without a demand being made, is silent. It is felt before it is seen. And in the empath who has reached Sophia, this is precisely the quality that emerges. A power so complete and so quiet that most people experience it as a presence rather than a force. They cannot name it, they cannot locate it. They simply know, in the part of themselves that recognizes things before the mind catches up, that this person is different from anyone they have encountered before. The first thing that happens when an empath reaches Sophia is that they stop absorbing other people's emotions and start observing them. This is the shift that changes everything. For most of their lives, the empath's gift was also their greatest vulnerability. They felt what others felt so completely that the boundary between their own emotional state and the emotional state of the room around them was barely a boundary at all. Walk into a space filled with anxiety, and the empath became anxious. Sit across from someone carrying grief, and the empath began to grieve alongside them, not as a performance of sympathy, but as a genuine neurological response. This capacity made them extraordinary healers, extraordinary listeners, extraordinary presences in moments of pain. Also made them extraordinarily easy to manipulate, because the person who knows that you feel what they feel has an instrument of influence that requires no sophistication to use. Simply perform the emotion. The empath will respond. Sophia ends this vulnerability without ending the gift. The empath who has reached it does not stop feeling. Start choosing what they do with what they feel, so they can sense the anxiety in a room without becoming anxious. They can perceive the grief in someone across from them without absorbing it into their own body. They have developed what Machiavelli would recognize as the capacity of the great strategist to gather information from the emotional landscape around them, without being moved by it against their will. They observe. They assess, choose their response deliberately. And this shift from absorption to observation makes them more effective, not less. Because the empath who is drowning in what everyone else feels cannot help anyone. The empath who can feel it all while remaining grounded in themselves can do anything. The second thing that happens is that their silence becomes the most powerful communication they possess. Before Sophia, the empath's silence was often a wound. It was the quiet of someone who had tried to speak and been dismissed too many times. It was the withdrawal of someone too exhausted to explain themselves one more time to someone who is never going to understand. But after Sophia, silence transforms into something Machiavelli would immediately recognize as strategic. The empath who has reached Sophia no longer fills silence to manage the discomfort of others. They allow silence to exist and do its work. They know that the person who speaks first from discomfort has already revealed something. They know that the space between words carries more information than the words themselves. And they have learned to read that space with a precision that makes those who do not understand it feel permanently slightly off balance in their presence. The third thing that happens is that they develop a clarity about human motivation that borders on the supernatural. Machiavelli spent his career studying why people do what they do, not what they say they do, not what they believe they do, but what actually drives the decisions they make when the stakes are real and the performance falls away. He concluded that most human behavior, stripped of its justifications and rationalizations, is driven by a small number of consistent forces: the desire for security, the need for significance, the fear of irrelevance, the hunger for power, and the avoidance of shame. The empath who has reached Sophia arrives at the same understanding through an entirely different path. Not through observation of external behavior, but through the accumulated experience of having felt every version of human motivation from the inside. They have felt people's real fear beneath their performed confidence. They have felt people's actual contempt beneath their performed affection. They have felt the hunger for power operating beneath the language of generosity. And once you have felt it that many times, you cannot be fooled by the performance anymore. The fourth thing that happens is that they become impossible to guilt into compliance. This is the one that shocks people most, because guilt was always the primary instrument used against the empath. The empath's deep empathy, their genuine capacity to feel the pain of others, made them extraordinarily susceptible to guilt as a control mechanism.
Tell the empath that your pain is their responsibility, and they will feel the weight of that claim before they have even evaluated whether it is true.
They will adjust. They will accommodate. They will bend themselves into shapes that were never natural to them in order to relieve a guilt that was never legitimately theirs to carry. Sophia ends this permanently, not by making the empath callous, but by giving them the discernment to distinguish between genuine responsibility and manufactured obligation. The empath who has reached Sophia can hear the guilt-laden statement, feel its emotional weight, and evaluate its legitimacy as a separate operation. And when the evaluation concludes that the guilt is a tool rather than a truth, they set it down without drama, without explanation, without the slightest wobble in their composure. The fifth thing that happens when an empath reaches Sophia is that they stop trying to change people and start accepting them with a clarity that is both compassionate and completely unsentimental. This is one of the most profound shifts in the entire transformation, and the one that Machiavelli would find most interesting. He wrote that the great mistake of idealistic leaders was believing that people could be changed through inspiration, through example, through the power of a sufficiently compelling vision. He believed that human nature was essentially fixed, that people acted from the same drives consistently, that expecting someone to fundamentally alter their character was a form of wishful thinking that led to consistently disappointed outcomes. The empath before Sophia disagreed with this instinctively. They believed in people's potential with an almost religious fervor. They stayed in relationships long past the point of any reasonable hope because they could see, or believed they could see, who the person could become if they just tried hard enough, grew enough, healed enough. Sophia does not make the empath agree with Machiavelli entirely, but it brings them to a position of respect for his observation. The empath who has reached Sophia still believes in human potential. They simply stop funding it with their own life. They stop making themselves responsible for someone else's becoming. They look at a person clearly, not at who that person could be, but at who that person has consistently shown themselves to be, and they make their decisions from that clarity. This is not cynicism. It is the final form of genuine compassion, seeing someone as they actually are, rather than as a project, rather than as a wound that needs your particular healing, rather than as a potential that has been waiting for your love to unlock it. Seeing them as they are, and deciding, from that clear-eyed seeing, what role, if any, you will play in their life. The sixth thing that happens is that the empath who has reached Sophia begins to use their understanding of human nature with a precision and intentionality that Machiavelli would immediately recognize as strategic genius. Before Sophia, the empath's insight into people was something that happened to them, overwhelming, often painful, rarely controlled. After Sophia, it becomes a tool. They know what motivates the person across from them. They know what that person fears, what they need to feel significant, what they are actually asking for beneath what they are saying. and they choose deliberately, consciously, from a position of complete clarity, how much of that knowledge to act on, when to act on it, and in whose interest. This is the point where the empath's gift and Machiavellian intelligence merge into something that most people will never encounter in a single human being. The capacity to feel everything and use it strategically, to understand human nature at the deepest level and deploy that understanding with the precision of someone who has fully integrated both their heart and their mind into a single coherent instrument of will. The seventh and final thing that happens is the one that contains all the others. The empath who reaches Sophia stops needing the world to be different from what it is. This sounds simple. It is the most difficult thing a human being can do. For most of their lives, the empath's suffering came not just from what was done to them, but from the gap between how the world actually operated and how they believed. At the deepest level, it should operate. They believed in reciprocity and encountered exploitation. They believed in honesty and encountered manipulation. They believed in the fundamental goodness of human intention and encountered the fundamental consistency of human self-interest. Every encounter with that gap was a fresh wound. Every betrayal was not just a loss, but a confirmation of something they were not yet ready to accept. Sophia is the acceptance. It's not the bitter acceptance of someone who has given up, but the clear-eyed, grounded, unshakable acceptance of someone who has finally stopped requiring the world to be other than it is in order to be okay. The empath who has reached Sophia looks at human nature with all of its self-interest, all of its smallness, all of its capacity for casual cruelty and unconscious manipulation, and they are not destroyed by it. They are not surprised by it. They are not continuously rewounded by the confirmation of what they now fully understand. They simply see it. They factor it into their decisions. They protect themselves from its worst expressions without losing their capacity for genuine connection with the rare people who deserve it. Machiavelli would recognize this state immediately. He called it the possession of virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but the quality of a person who has fully mastered themselves and therefore cannot be mastered by circumstances. The person who knows exactly what the world is and has built themselves strong enough to navigate it without pretending it is something else. The empath who reaches Sophia possesses this quality in a form that Machiavelli never quite described but would have deeply respected, because it is built not from the absence of feeling but from the complete integration of it. They feel everything. They are moved by nothing that does not deserve to move them. This is the rarest form of human development. It is what happens when the most sensitive person in the room becomes, through the alchemy of everything they survived, the most grounded. When the person who once gave everything to everyone becomes the person who gives precisely what is warranted to exactly who has earned it. When the person who was once the easiest target in any room becomes the one that every manipulator, every user, every person who mistakes kindness for weakness will sense before a word is spoken, before a move is made, is not available to them. Not hostile, not cold, simply and completely unavailable. Because Sophia is not a wall, it is a frequency. And at that frequency, certain things simply cannot reach you anymore. When an empath reaches Sophia, they do not become less. They become, for the first time, fully what they always were. The gift intact, the wound healed, the power finally, completely, entirely their own.